Hey, I'm John here at Rat City Studios, and I'm going to be giving you a rundown on how I trim bulls. So this guy right here I have ready to go. It's a nice leather hardness. So you can see here I kind of have it loosely in the shape that I want, and we'll be trimming from that. And I brought this one in just to kind of show an example of what I'm shooting for. I find that it helps quite a bit to kind of pre-visualize what you're wanting your form to look like before you actually start cutting into it. That way you kind of have an idea of where you're going. So the way I learned to secure this guy to the wheel head, or actually I have it on a wooden bat here, is by using clay lugs. So what you're going to want to do is take a little bit of good soft clay and kind of roll it out into a coil, and you're going to want at least 3. 4 is probably going to be a little better for something this size. So I'm going to go ahead and make these into 4 just little logs. They don't have to be perfect or anything because we're going to kind of mash them down here in a second. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we do that, we want to make sure this thing's actually centered. So it's pretty close, kind of has a little bit of a wobble to it. So the easiest way to get this is to kind of watch it at one point. So I typically look at this, 6 o'clock position here, and then once it gets close to my finger at its, the top of its arc, because it's kind of going back and forth a little bit, then I'll push it just slightly away. And then I'll repeat that a couple times just until I get it to where I'm totally happy with it. I'm going to go ahead and get these on. So for this first one, I'm going to make sure this bat's just a little bit damp, just so that it will stick down pretty well. That one goes on there. Then I'll do the one directly across from it. And I'm not really pushing against the side of the pot so much as pushing down and then making sure that there's enough clay to kind of support it. The main thing is you want to just hold it in place. You don't want to be pushing on it because then it'll cause it to jump off. And before you start trimming, you want to kind of just double check and make sure it's about where you want it. And that's using lugs. So now a little bit more advanced way of doing this. If you're feeling a little bit bolder, it's a little bit riskier, but it will save you time once you kind of get the feel for it. We're basically going to have this thing centered and use a little bit of a vacuum inside of the form to secure it down. So what this will allow us to do is basically skip this entire step, and it'll save about a few minutes per pot. So what we want to do for this is get this out of the way. I'm going to make sure that this is not sopping wet, but damp. So I'll get it, kind of coat the whole thing in water and then take it all back away. So you can, I don't know if you can kind of see, it has a little bit of a sheen there to it. And then we will place this back on there. This method works really well if you have a wide form that's not really tall, and also if it has quite a bit of weight. This is about a 6-pound bull here, so I'm not too worried about it jumping around. Most of the trimming I'm actually going to be doing is pushing down rather than to the side, so I don't usually have to worry about it jumping off too much. But now that we have that water on there, it's actually getting kind of hard to move it around because it makes a pretty tight seal. So I'm going to kind of recenter it again real quick. And once we get that pretty good, I'll just give it just a little bit of a turn and kind of pushing down at the same time. And that kind of locks it in place. So now, I can tap on it, it's not really wanting to move at all. So it's secure enough that I'm comfortable with it. Again, this is kind of a risky thing, so practice it on something that you're not super, attached to, I guess. So if we have, looking at this example bull here, I'm going to mark a line about in this position here on this outside edge, and then another one on this inside edge. And that's just going to allow me to kind of visualize where that foot ring is actually going to sit, and then I can make adjustments for this particular size. So start about there, and I'm just very lightly, like both of my arms are braced against my legs. I have as many fingers as possible on this little tool so it doesn't move at all, because the clay is going to want to kick it around just a little bit. So once I get that first line established, pretty happy with where it's at. Go ahead and do the second one, inside ring. Right, I'm good with that. So now we can just go in and start doing the fun part, cutting this stuff away. Now I don't know if you can see, this kind of has a little bit of a bobble there to it. So if we start at the top and come down, we can actually eliminate that. So here I'm just pushing straight down with the tool. I'm kind of actually working away from center as well at the same time. And so that took away most of that. It still has a little bit, but not too much. So the first part of trimming really is just kind of getting the form a little bit more true to center with what you're trimming off. So like as it's coming around where it's closer to this tool, it's going to take off just slightly more. The key is to keep very, very soft, even pressure and just let the tool do the work. Alright, so at this point I'm going to go ahead and cut this line in here, which is roughly equivalent to that. It's important to know about how thick your pot is down here, because you don't want to get all this, go through all this work of getting it to this point and then go through. That's about the worst thing, cutting a hole in the bottom of your pot while you're trimming it. If you get to this point and you can't quite remember, you can do this trick where you kind of tap on it a little bit. And as the pitch gets a little bit higher, that's where you know it's a little bit thinner. So at this point, I can probably take a little bit off more down here to even it out some. But up here, it's probably about at the thickness I want it. Pretty good with how this plane right here and this plane right here are looking. So I'm going to go ahead and jump up to this top part here. This is typically where if you cut a hole in it, it's going to be right here in the center, because that's usually the lowest part on the opposite side. So first thing I'm going to do is just kind of even this part where the actual foot ring is going to exist. Just kind of evening that out a little bit. Taking any kind of waviness or funniness off of there. Then I'm going to start back with that line that I marked earlier and kind of work my way in. So this whole process goes much more smoothly, and it's much more enjoyable if your tools are very sharp. So you can sharpen those up with sandpaper or like an angle grinder, not an angle grinder, a bench grinder, or something of the like. And then higher quality steel holds an edge better as well. So those really cheap trimming tools you get like in the beginner pottery kit, They're great for learning, not to knock them or anything, but it's way more enjoyable trimming with a little bit higher quality tool that has a little bit better steel. Right, so I'm gonna kind of tap on it again just to make sure that I'm not getting too close to it being too thin. And it still feels pretty good. On these large bowls, I typically leave like 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of clay at the bottom, just so that I have plenty to trim. If you don't want to trim as much, you can certainly leave a little bit less clay down there and it's not an issue. But if you do leave that amount of clay, you want to make sure you trim away most of it. Otherwise you're going to run into issues in the firing. So I don't know if y'all can see this here. There's a little bit that got away from me with the tool. It kind of slipped a bit. So that's going to bug me. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that up. So basically what I'm doing here is resurfacing and grading this little plane here, similar to how a road would be done. So I use this tool here, and it has this point on it. And I'm going to use that point to basically kind of just scrape a line into this. So I'm basically taking the top maybe millimeter or so of clay and kind of destroying it essentially, and then I'll go back and smooth it down with the flat side. So that's what I'm about to do here. This is what it looks like. So important to keep everything very well braced again for this part. So there's going to be one part where it goes around that the clay hits it at the high point, and it's going to want to make your tool jump. So you have to make sure that tool's in control the whole time. And you'll know you're good once you stop feeling that bump. Once that goes away, you know it's mostly smooth. Now we have these little grooves cut into it, but again, we just take this guy and press into that a little bit, and pretty much like it never happened. So now I'm gonna just make this foot ring a bit smaller. It's a little wider than I'd like it. And the last thing I'll do is just go in and kind of smooth these surfaces out one last time, just to get any kind of lines that you don't want to be there once it's fired out. So once that's all pretty good, kind of looking at some of these different surfaces and noticing if we have any weird little lines or anything, kind of have something weird going on here. So I'm going to go and kind of smooth this whole surface out again. So what I found is an easy way to do that is to take your sponge, get a little bit of water on it, just damp, not a ton of it. You don't want to be completely re-soaking this thing, but just to get that surface wet again. And again, this is just going to be that top little bit of clay, and then taking a soft rubber rib and just kind of going back over that, and that'll get that surface really nice and smooth again. And you can kind of really nitpick this thing to death if you let yourself. But last thing I do is take this little sharp edge and just kind of compress it in with my finger just to round it off a little bit, so that we don't have any potential issues with people picking this up and cutting their hand or something like that. But that is trimming.
Hi everyone, I'm going to show you trimming a foot on this V-shaped bowl on a foam bat. So first I'm going to show you some of the trimming tools I use. These are bison trimming tools, and then this smaller metal trim tool. So these are the three that I'll probably use the most. I will also use a sponge to smooth things out, as well as possibly a rib. This foam bat was made by just epoxying foam from the fabric store onto the bat. And it's really easy. It's a great tool. It makes it so if you have an uneven rim, you can easily trim it without damaging it. And it also makes it so when you tap center, your pot won't move around as fast. So, sorry about the squeaky wheel, but it squeaks. I'm going to start by tap centering this. So the rings on here help, but if you're trying to tap center, you can start by finding a beat to your pot. So holding your thumb, left thumb, where you can get this beat. So I'm feeling it as 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I add a half beat to that and I do 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, if you hit on the and, it will find center. So 1 and 1 and. If you don't want to count, you can also do bum, 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 and then hit on the ditty. So bum diddy, bum diddy, bum diddy, bum diddy. My left hand is pressing down so that it doesn't go shooting across the room if I hit it a little too hard. Sometimes a double tap is helpful. Tap centering is great because it goes a lot faster once you practice and learn how, and it makes it so that I will pick it up and check the thickness a lot more often, which ends up making it so that I have a more thoroughly trimmed pot. So I'm going to begin by taking off the largely uneven areas just with a broader tool. I always start on the outside edge because with this trimming style I want to press down pretty firmly on the top, and if I trim the center first it'll be soft, and when I'm pressing down that hard it'll just distort my pot. I also try to throw and leave as little clay as the form needs in order to hold its shape. So these don't need a ton of trimming. I'm just going to start to define the interior space. Maybe I'll speed up just a little. Alright, so I'm getting close. So what I want to do is check. And right now I'm feeling the thickness, and I'm trying to feel any spots that feel overly thick or overly thin. If it's overly thick, I want to trim it more, and if it's getting really thin, then I want to avoid trimming that area. This one's feeling pretty good. I'd say it could use just a little more here, and then I can move toward the center. The final touch that I'll give the outside is either a plastic or metal rib, just depending on how firm the clay is, maybe both, to smooth out any trimming marks that I don't want to have. Alright, now I'm going to move forward with the interior. So I'm being really careful to stay just to the inside of that defining line. And when I'm using this tool, I'm touching it down and then rocking it. It's not just a static movement. So now I'm rocking toward the point, and then I'll rock back toward the more rounded back edge. And I'm moving closer and closer toward the very center. And I know from double checking that this bowl comes to a point, so the very center is where I need to trim the least, and as I move toward the foot ring, I need to trim more. Now before I go too much further, I'm just going to pick this up, double check. So I still have some clay all the way through the bottom that could come off. So I'm pressing down just behind the trim tool to help this not shift, and then as I move off center, my finger is moving toward center to hold So now I'm holding right in the center. Just doing a little bit more finishing on the very bottom. Alright, I'm going to use this metal rib to curve and carve away any unevenness that I don't want left. I'm holding the rib fairly perpendicular to the pot. Alright, and then for the final smoothing, I'm going to get all these trimmings out of here so they don't get sticky. And I'm just going to gently smooth this. Maybe I can smooth here a little. I'm going to be careful about adding too much water to a really thin, recently trimmed pot. And I can take my rib and smooth the surface. And that's finished. So now I have a pot with a foot, and this could be a finished piece, or it could be something that I use as a building block for other pieces. And this is something, this foot is what I consider this shape, is what I would use for my dessert boat shapes. Alright, and there it is.
Hi, I'm Jake Corboy at Rat City Studios, and I'm going to show you how to set up the GIFFIN grip for trimming. Alright, so for wide low shapes, I like to use these supports on the GIFFIN grip. You just stick them in here. You got to make sure that they're all lined up, otherwise they won't go in like that. And then it's very simple. You take your plate here and just twist it until it's centered and locked in nice and snug, and then you can go ahead and start trimming. This also works great for bowl shapes like this, wide and low shapes. Spin it in, lock it in, automatically centers it for you. And I also like to use them for these things because I can pinch them in there on that bottom lip there, and then it allows me to finish the bottoms of these shapes. But if you're using a taller shape like this, that's not going to be enough to keep your pot from rolling around out there. So you can flip these things around, just like so. And then the GIFFIN grip comes with all these little metal rods, these little attachments here. And there's all different lengths of rods. So if you're using a big, tall piece, you can use the taller ones. If you're using a piece that's not that tall, you can use these shorter ones. And so this just elevates your grip. So you'll have higher grip on your higher pieces, and it'll keep it from rolling around. You can also use it for your chucks if you'd like to. Stick your chuck on there. If you have a piece with a skinny neck, you can just set it in there and start trimming. And for taller pieces like this, these ones are a little bit too short, so you could take it out and you can switch it up to the longer pieces. Sometimes you gotta make sure they're completely out so you can get it in there. Doesn't really make sense. There you go, and that'll support your piece. sure it's snug. That'll support your piece while you're trimming it. And that's how you use the GIFFIN grip.
Sweet.
Hi everybody! Today I'm going to show you how I trim a pot using a chuck. And today I'm using this chuck. It is a vessel, a bottomless vessel that was thrown and it's only been bisped. So I'm going to start out by throwing a ring with a piece of clay and I'm going to insert the chuck into it. Checking to see if it's gonna fit, and it looks like it needs to be a little bit wider still. Okay, that looks like it will be good. I'm gonna try to get it as centered as possible before I turn the wheel back on. Okay. So once you get it pretty centered, you can either squeeze in on the ring to kind of coil it in and hold the chuck in place, or I'm just going to hold it like this and squish in some parts. Okay. Next, you're going to get your vessel and put it upside down into the chuck. This is going to make sure that if you have a lip on it that you don't want it to get messed up and it won't touch the bottom this way, or if it's too narrow at the top and it can't stand up on its own, then the chuck is great to use. So I'm going to have to center this now, make sure the vessel is centered. What I like to do is use my fingernail or hold a pin tool right to the edge, and wherever it touches, I know that it's a little bit uncentered in that direction. Oops. So the pin tool hit right here, so it's a little bit off. I'm just pushing against on that side. That's pretty good. So I'm going to start by using this tool. This one's the one I usually start out with. And I'm just going to start in the middle and create a foot ring. I like to hold the tool with both hands because I feel like it gives me a little bit more stability that way. Okay, then when I come to the outside, I like to just hold my finger on the middle, and sometimes I use my pinky out here for support. All of this is just to help stabilize it so it doesn't wobble all over the place. You can use a larger trimming tool if you want a larger space, or I also like to use a metal rib to smooth everything out. You can even go back in with the sponge, get it a little bit damp again. And then I'll do my last touch with this red rubber rib. And I'm going to finish it off with my signature. Ta-da!